There are no coincidences in life, only divine assignments. You didn't just stumble into the narcissist's life by accident. You were placed there with a purpose, positioned at a critical moment in their journey. Your presence wasn't random, it was intentional. Whether you recognize it at the time or not, you were sent as a light, a guide, and a reflection of something greater. From the beginning, something inside you may have felt drawn to them, as if you were meant to help, to heal, to show them a different way. You saw their potential, not just their pain. You believed that if they could just see what you saw, if they could recognize their own worth beyond the mask they wore, things would be different. You weren't wrong to believe in them. You were sent to be that possibility. But understand this, your role was never to fix them. You were never meant to carry the weight of their wounds or to sacrifice yourself trying to love them into healing. Your presence alone was the lesson. Your kindness, your patience, your willingness to forgive, these were all opportunities for them to wake up, to change, to finally break free from the destructive cycle they had been trapped in for so long. They had encountered people before who had walked away, who had given up on them, who saw through the facade and refused to stay. But you were different. You were sent as the final chance, the last reminder before the consequences of their actions could no longer be ignored. Your compassion was proof that grace still existed, that love was still reaching for them. And yet, even when someone is given a gift, they have the choice to receive it or reject it. Some people are so consumed by their own illusions that they refuse to see the truth standing right in front of them. They mistake kindness for weakness. They take patience for granted. They believe they will always have another chance, another person willing to endure their chaos. But what they fail to realize is that even divine mercy has a limit. So when the moment came, when they made their choice, when they chose pride over transformation, manipulation over honesty, control over love, that was the turning point. Not for them, but for you. Because once you fulfilled your purpose in someone's life, God will not allow you to stay where you are no longer needed. The assignment ends. The lesson is complete. And whether they understood it or not, your presence was their final warning. But if you look closely, this wasn't just about them, this was also about you. Because while you were sent for a purpose, you were also meant to learn something in the process. You were meant to see your own worth. To understand that love is not proven by how much you endure, but by how deeply you honor yourself. That sometimes walking away is the greatest act of love you can give, not just to them, but to yourself. And when God removes you, it's never rejection, it's redirection. You were sent as a lesson, but now you are being led to something greater. Life has a way of whispering before it shouts. The narcissist was given warnings long before you entered their life, subtle nudges, painful lessons, opportunities to reflect and change. But time and time again, they ignored them. They dismissed the hurt they caused, brushed off the consequences, and convinced themselves that the problem was never them. Each warning was an invitation to grow, yet they chose to stay the same. People have walked away from them before, not because they were unlovable, but because their actions made love unsustainable. Friends have distanced themselves, partners have left, and family members have set boundaries. All signs that something needed to change, and yet, rather than looking inward, they found ways to justify their behavior. They told themselves that others were the problem, that they were misunderstood, that they were always the victim. When someone consistently ignores life's signals, the warnings don't stop, they just get louder. Maybe it started with small losses, relationships that fell apart, opportunities that slipped through their fingers. But instead of taking accountability, they blamed circumstances, other people, or bad luck. The lesson was there, waiting to be acknowledged, but pride kept them from facing it. And then you came along, not as another warning, but as the final one. Your love, your patience, your unwavering belief in their potential. This was their last chance to see themselves clearly. If they had been paying attention, they would have realized that this was not just another relationship, not just another cycle. This was a crossroads. A moment that required them to make a choice, continue down the same path, or finally face the truth. But old habits die hard. Instead of gratitude, they took your presence for granted. Instead of seeing the value in what you offered, they assumed you would always be there. They mistook your kindness for permission, your forgiveness for weakness. And so they repeated the same destructive patterns, thinking they could continue to manipulate, control, or use without consequence. What they didn't realize is that when warnings are ignored for too long, the lesson stops coming in the form of people and starts arriving as consequences. They may have thought they got away with it, that they could continue moving through life without ever being held accountable, but divine timing doesn't operate on their schedule. The very thing they refuse to acknowledge is now the thing that will catch up to them. And perhaps the most tragic part of it all is that they had a choice. They were given every opportunity to change, to heal, to grow. The universe, God, or whatever force you believe in was not working against them. It was trying to save them. But when someone believes they are above the lesson, they eventually become the lesson themselves. Because the final warning is never just about the person delivering it. It's about what happens when there are no more warnings left to give. Nothing in life happens by accident. Every encounter, every connection, every person who crosses our path is placed there for a reason. You didn't just walk into the narcissist's life randomly. You were positioned there at a precise moment at a time when they needed to be confronted with their own reflection. Whether they recognized it or not, your presence was an act of divine intervention, a final opportunity for them to choose a different path. You arrived when they were at a crossroads, whether they were aware of it or not. Perhaps they had already faced losses, already seen cracks forming in the carefully crafted world they built around themselves. Maybe they were beginning to feel the weight of their own choices, the consequences of the bridges they burned. And just when life was nudging them toward change, you entered, not as another casualty in their cycle, but as the moment of reckoning they could no longer ignore. God, the universe, or fate itself knew exactly when to place you in their path. Had you met them earlier, you might not have been strong enough to see them for who they truly were. Had you met them later, they might have already descended too deep into their own destruction. But at this moment, right here, right now, the timing was undeniable. They were given one last mirror, one last chance to break free from the patterns that had trapped them for so long. But divine timing is never just about them, it's also about you. You were placed there to learn something just as much as they were. Perhaps you needed to understand the limits of your compassion, to see that love alone cannot save someone who refuses to be saved. Maybe you needed to recognize your own worth, to realize that your presence in someone's life is a privilege, not something to be taken for granted. Timing also reveals truth. When you look back, you might notice the moments when you felt something was off. Those small, fleeting instincts that told you this wasn't where you were meant to stay. Those feelings weren't coincidences, they were signals. Divine placement isn't just about arriving, it's also about knowing when it's time to leave. And when that time comes, no amount of love, patience, or effort can extend the lesson. The same force that placed you in their life will also pull you away when your role has been fulfilled. There is a point when staying becomes resisting, when holding on becomes a refusal to trust that something better is waiting beyond this chapter. Divine timing doesn't always feel kind in the moment. It can feel like loss, like confusion, like betrayal. But when you zoom out, when you see the full picture, you realize that everything unfolded exactly as it was meant to. You weren't just meant to be a lesson for them. You were meant to step into a lesson of your own. Because placement is never random, timing is never accidental. And when the purpose of your presence has been served, the same force that sent you will be the one to remove you. Every person is given moments in life where they must decide who they want to become. The narcissist was no different. They were presented with countless opportunities to grow, to reflect, to choose a different way of being. Life didn't just hand them these chances, it placed them directly in front of them, through people, through experiences, through you. But no matter how much potential was placed within their reach, the decision was always theirs to make. Change is never forced upon anyone. It is a choice that must be made willingly, with intention, with humility. And that choice requires something that many people, especially those who thrive on control, are unwilling to do. It requires them to face themselves. It requires them to acknowledge their flaws, to admit their wrongs, to recognize that the way they have moved through life has not only hurt others, but has also damaged them. When you entered their life, you weren't just another person. You were a reflection, a challenge, a mirror to the parts of themselves they tried to hide. Your love, your patience, your unwavering belief in their ability to be better, it was all proof that they were still redeemable, that change was still possible, but belief alone is not enough. No one can transform for them. No one can do the inner work they refuse to do. So they stood at a crossroads. On one side was the path of healing, accountability, and growth. It would have required them to let go of their ego, to surrender their need for control, to learn how to love in a way that wasn't rooted in manipulation or self-interest. It would have been uncomfortable. It would have forced them to face truths they spent years avoiding, but it also would have set them free. On the other side was the path they knew all too well, the one of denial, of excuses, of blaming others for the very wounds they refused to heal. It was easier, required no work, no introspection, no disruption to the illusion they built around themselves. It allowed them to continue their cycle, to repeat the same behaviors, to dismiss yet another person who cared for them as just another mistake in their story. And when the moment came, when the choice stood right in front of them, they made their decision. Maybe they convinced themselves they had more time. Maybe they thought they could continue on as they always had, that people like you would always exist, always forgive, always come back. Maybe they truly believed they were untouchable, that consequences were for other people. But what they didn't realize is that rejecting change doesn't just affect them, it alters the course of everything around them. Because the world doesn't wait for those who refuse to grow. Life moves on, people move on, and the opportunities that are ignored don't return in the same way twice. Because when you choose to reject transformation, you don't just stay the same. You fall further into what you are trying to avoid until one day there is no more choice left to make.